Okay, so I'm super excited about today because we're doing something completely different than we've done on this show before. I'm going into the Reddit verse, which I realize can be kind of scary, but specifically questions asked either by non-Christians or Christians themselves to Christians. So specifically questions for Christians. I am myself a Christian, and I'm excited to answer some of these questions, but also to look at what other people have said about some of these questions as well and give you some live reactions as we go. But let's dive right in. So the first one here is boyfriend doesn't like me wearing short skirts. Here's some of the context. I never look trashy, but sometimes I wear short skirts or shorts in the Northeast summer. Now, my boyfriend says that wearing short skirts is immodest, and he cites the scriptures. And he's not comfortable with other men looking at me. Insecure and red flag, right? Now, the rest of her post has to do with some of the reactions that we'll get to in a moment, but I just wanted to give you kind of my story on this. When I was first married, when Stephanie and I were first married 10 years ago this October, we had a very similar disagreement. I was raised in a hyper-conservative home where the women in our home only wore knee-length or usually ankle-length skirts, and that was it. Like, it was a very independent Baptist view of modesty. My wife's family was very modest and also conservative, but not to the degree that my family was, and so they would wear sweatpants and jeans and things like that, and my family would have considered that immodest back when I was growing up. And so we had a disagreement when I first was married over what she was going to wear and what she wasn't going to wear, and I was uncomfortable with her wearing jeans outside of the house, and I was uncomfortable with her wearing shorts outside of the house. And for a lot of these same reasons that I think this person's boyfriend is mentioning. But when I actually started digging into it, the scripture's not as clear as it looks like it might be. So yes, I think that the scripture talks about modesty, right? And talks about being covered, and mainly the passages that talk about modesty are designed to, especially when we're talking about like in worship services, I'm thinking of in 1 Corinthians when it's talking about women having their head covered, which would be a sign of modesty, a sign of submission in that culture. The reason for that is to be as not distracting as possible. There's another passage in the New Testament that talks about women not having their hair braided or with like lots of jewelry or things like that. And the whole point of that is that braids aren't bad and jewelry is not bad, but you shouldn't be drawing attention to yourself. And so I actually have a different perspective on modesty as a whole, that it's not so much what you wear as it is the reason why you wear it. And she actually says here in her edit on this post is, I don't dress for attention from men. So her intention is not impure. There are definitely lines, and I'm not sure that we can scripturally draw those lines, but I think we should have them. And some of them are culturally drawn, but some of them are just things that accentuate the female form. Can be very distracting for young men trying to stay pure. Now, particularly, this is true for all men, but particularly for young men going through puberty and coming out of puberty, the hormones are raging. Like, it doesn't take much for our minds to start wandering into territory that would be sinful. And I'm not laying that at the doorstep of young women. I realize that there's been a lot of shaming that's gone on in the Christian community as far as making it the women's fault that men are stumbling into sexual sin or stumbling into lustful thinking or pornography or things like that. However, even though I'm not laying the blame entirely at the feet of young women, our culture is a sex-selling culture. And the things that are considered fashionable in this day and age, by and large, are designed to sell sex. And so if you're dressing like the culture, then you're almost branding yourself as a sex peddler, even if that's not your intent. And even if you think it's just something cute to wear or whatever. And so I think we have to kind of draw some different lines in the sexually charged culture that we live in, where the things that people wear are intentionally designed to draw attention to the more provocative and evocative parts of the female form. And I think that you can definitely wear some form-fitting, some figure-showing clothing and be completely modest and have a completely pure heart and all of those things. But I also think you can bend those lines to the point to where it's almost impossible for a young man to look at you and not have to suppress some kind of thought or avert his eyes or something like that. But I also want to address this: is he insecure, and is this a red flag? Maybe you guys just need to sit down and actually go through the scriptures together. Maybe you actually need to break it down and say, is this actually informed by scripture, or is this informed by my tradition? Because that's where I landed, that it was mostly informed by my tradition, and the way that we can interpret modesty in scripture has a broader range than I was giving it credit for. And so maybe that's just something you and your boyfriend, or maybe you and your boyfriend and your pastor need to go through and break down how those passages actually are applicable. I don't necessarily think that him being uncomfortable with other men looking at you is a sign of insecurity. It could be, but it could also be a sign that he really loves you and he really cares about you, and he really doesn't want you to be looked down upon or objectified in that manner. And so you kind of have to make a judgment call. I don't necessarily think it automatically means he's insecure, but it could be. It could also just be that he's looking out for you in his way. I want to look at what some other people say about this, because obviously there were some hurtful things being said. You say, why am I being attacked? So let's see what's going on. Yeah, that's how my husband and I are. We don't dictate how each other should dress, and we both look good. If my husband or I am looking like a snack, then it's up to others to manage their own emotions. There's also no such thing as a proper wife-husband, just one who knows when it's the right time and place for stuff. If Adam never sinned, we'd all be still walking around naked. Okay, so there's a lot in there, but basically she's saying, I agree with you. You know, we basically dress to look nice and expect others to manage their own emotions. Again, mostly I think that that's fine, but I think there is a line. Looks are the very last thing I care about. I wear jeans and a pocket tee daily. She wears joggers and a tee. I care more about who she is than I do about clothes, makeup, and hair. She's beautiful, full of mud, or in a party dress. I've known so many fake, truly horrible women that are pretty. No thanks. Been there, done that. Burned the bridge after I crossed it. I really like that perspective. That's really sweet. And I actually wrote a song, which you should look it up somewhere. I think it's on SoundCloud, called Prettiest Girl in the World. Where it talks about that, like when your day's been long and you've got old clothes on and you don't want anyone to see, when your hair's undone and your makeup's gone, looking nice is a luxury. Still, to me, you're the prettiest girl in the world. And I believe that. That's how I think about my wife. If your boyfriend doesn't like short skirts, then he shouldn't wear them. What you wear isn't his business. I like that. That's hilarious. Oh my goodness. Proverbs 31. This is the answer. Okay, that's very vague. The Proverbs 31 woman, I don't think addresses this particular topic. LOL, it's literally always just leave him for everything. All the stuff our grandparents went through, I can't imagine my grandmother being like, he wanted me to stop wearing short skirts, left him. He didn't want me hanging out with guy friends all the time, left him. Breathed more than 27 times a minute, left him. I'm so thankful I've been blessed with good girlfriends my whole life, but man, the modern woman really makes me never want to get married ever. You might be a little bit dramatic there, but I definitely think that the divorce culture, the date culture, basically dating is practice for divorce, everything's a red flag. Everything is, we're not committed to anyone anymore, it feels like, and I definitely think that people want to end relationships over very trivial things. However, I definitely think that it is better to have these discussions before entering something like marriage than not. But I don't know that it's necessarily warranted to say that this particular woman is being way too picky. So are you wearing them for attention, or are you wearing them for style? Regardless, wearing such clothes would attract other men as well, both good and unwanted. I don't think it's an issue if you're with him, but if alone, I'd caution. Let me just say something here that I think is really a good point to make, and then we'll go to a different question. Being attractive as a woman is not wrong, but be attractive for the person you're committed to. Be attractive for your spouse. Be attractive for your fiance. Be attractive for the person you're in a relationship for. Like, if you're not on the market, don't shop around. If you're not on the market, don't sell yourself. You know what I'm saying? And that's what I was getting to earlier with sometimes the fashionable dress in our culture is designed to sell sex. And so when we wear it, we come across as selling sex, even if we don't mean to. Just another thing to think about, like, being attractive is not wrong, but be attractive for the one you're committed to. Let's look at another question here. Let's see if we can find a good one. What evidence can you give me, an atheist, that proves or even suggests that God is real? I was raised in a Christian household, but I stopped practicing when I realized I personally had no evidence to satisfy my questions. Thanks for your answers. This is really interesting. When people say that they don't have any evidence to believe in God, especially the Christian God, because if you look at any other religion on the face of the planet, they actually have zero evidence that any of their claims are true. What Christianity has going for it is that we have evidence that our truth claims are actually truth claims. We have prophecies hundreds of years before the fulfillment that are hyper specific, that came to pass exactly as they were prophesied. And we have historical data outside of the Bible that proves that those things were written before the events, and the events took place in exactly that way. Just Jesus coming by himself, whether or not you believe he's actually God or not, but all of the prophecies that pertained to the Messiah figure that were fulfilled in Jesus, like, even if like 14 or 17 of those had been fulfilled, like, the chances of one person fulfilling those prophecies are infinitesimally small. And Jesus fulfilled so many New Testament prophecy or Old Testament prophecies in his person. But beyond Jesus, like, all of the events of the future that were predicted by the major prophets in the Old Testament that actually came to pass. One of my favorite ones is in the book of Daniel. It predicts the rise of basically Alexander the Great, is who it ended up being. And we actually have historical evidence written by another historian outside of the Bible that says that Alexander the Great himself read that prophecy in a Jewish synagogue. The prophecy about himself, he read it, which means if he read it, it had to have been written well before he ever came to power. He read it before he ever came into power and took over all the world. So I just love stuff like that, and it's so full of evidence for Christianity, at least. And then it's not that big of a leap. If the truth claims of Christianity are true, and if the truth claims of the Bible are true, it's not that big of a leap to go, I mean, that has to be supernaturally influenced. Like, the only way that someone could predict the future that accurately is if they had a link to the supernatural. And again, that's not a big leap to then God. Let's see what other people say here. I'm going to dismiss any religious text source because, quite frankly, it's belittling to the discussion. Instead, I'm going to challenge your presumption of the nature of God, specifically that if we are to entertain the notion of a higher power, that higher power must exist outside any conceivable reality that we humans can fathom. All I can leave you with is the fact that existence is, and despite being able to calculate, theorize as to just after when existence started, we don't really have a good idea what came before, what caused it, or what is beyond it, yet here everything is, rather impossibly. I don't know if you want to call that God, but the way I see it, existence is evidence of something greater than we can know. It's certainly more compelling to me than a book written by men with agendas. Going right next to it, this is probably the best argument in here. As someone who has never believed in a religious God, I've often wondered why anything exists. Why is there anything? That argument falls flat on its face, though, when considering no matter what you believe, at some point, something, everything came from nothing. Doesn't matter if that something was a god, a bang, a simulation, or something bigger than we can fathom. If you say that God has always existed, you're not thinking deep enough. Then you're left with the exact same argument atheists have when trying to explain the Big Bang, except with supernatural powers added to the mix. Okay, so yes, you're right. That is the great dilemma, and the reason why you can't ever say that a scientific theory of the origin of the Earth can ever be scientific. It's always, at the very least, philosophical, but it's almost always religious, because at a certain point you have to have faith that something always existed. There was something that preeminently existed before everything else. So that either could be God or it could be matter, but something had to be eternal. Something has to exist outside of this universe to create this universe. Something, because of the laws of the universe, something can't come from nothing. I see everyone responding almost virulently with the idea that faith can be based on evidence. The early church had this evidence. Paul tells the Corinthians in chapter 15 of his first book that there are 500 living witnesses of Jesus' resurrection. The evidence of the early church was the many people who gave their lives to advance a story from which they had nothing to gain and their lives to lose. In many ways, there was a historical argument for Christianity. Now, I'm not saying that Christianity has an airtight argument, but there is a case to be made for the resurrection of Christ. I would read books on the minimal facts hypothesis. Again, as a scientist, it is by no means airtight, but Gary Habermas and others have put together coherent arguments. I would highly recommend Gary Habermas to you, and the reason why is because if you can prove the resurrection of Jesus is legitimate, and he has a very good case from a historical perspective outside of the Bible, a historical perspective, not a textual perspective, why Jesus rose from the dead, basically why it's a historical fact that Jesus rose from the dead. If you can get to that, if you can prove that empirically, that Jesus actually rose from the dead, every other claim that Scripture makes is an easy leap from there. Because Jesus made some incredible claims, and the biggest, most outlandish thing that he claimed is that he was going to rise from the dead. If he kept that promise, then we can believe him when he says things like, I and the Father are one. We can believe him when he tells us what God is like. We can believe him when he tells us how to interpret the Old Testament. All of those things become true because the most outlandish thing was true. Jesus kept his word on the craziest possible thing, most inconceivable thing that he could have ever claimed. And so if Jesus rose from the dead, then Christianity is true. And Paul says if Jesus didn't rise from the dead, then Christians are of all people most miserable. Thank you so much for watching the Daily Conversation. I want to personally invite you to join us in the Daily Conversation. Over on Facebook, you can be part of the conversation. We will be pulling content from those conversations, pulling them right into the show. You'll have the opportunity to actually hash this out with me in person and with the amazing community that we're building over there. You can also do the same thing by leaving a comment here on YouTube, and we'll engage with you there, and let's actually talk this out.